Hi, Eva.
Hi, Andrew. It's good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for taking the time to just be with me and have this conversation, which I don't know where it's gonna go or how it's gonna go, but um, for my listeners, I want to say I don't remember how or where we've met, but I remember you as somebody who is deeply caring and deeply interested in the life of artists, particularly.
Yes, yes.
And so we've had conversations about um, kind of the arts ecosystem and how to
Mhm.
care for artists, particularly in the area of uh, the things that they don't necessarily like to do.
Right.
and and now you're doing something that's still very much in the caring space, but
Yeah,
for for a different time in one's life. Would you be willing to share a little bit about that?
sure. I love how you sort of connected that because I don't think I realized how much what I'm doing now still connects with what I've always done and loved until I was in a conversation with a friend recently. And
Yeah.
she was like, you're just the theme of community just runs deep in everything that you gravitate towards and enjoy and are passionate about. And I was like, yeah, that's true. It's still community, it's still curating in a way, but different in a different way, right? So what I've been working on for the last couple of years is around end of life learning, but specifically within the context of community building and relationships. Um, this really came out of when I was working in events and overseeing a building that was part of Redeemer Presbyterian Church. And kind of through that role of doing events and overseeing that building, became the default memorial services planner.
Oof.
And yeah, and I never planned a memorial service or funeral before that.
Wow.
I've had people I know pass, but I was never involved in the logistics of things. Um, so it was very interesting going into it initially with event planning experience and mode with my checklists and, all the things we need to do, all the questions.
Yep.
And then realizing that first conversation with every family was basically just me listening for 30 to sometimes 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Because there was just, I think part of it is obviously the person I'm talking to is grieving, is probably overwhelmed with a lot of different emotions and tasks,
Yep.
and usually had never planned a funeral before either. So they were asking me questions, probably more than I was asking them questions.
Same.
So yeah, so that's kind of and so from there, I think it just really opened my eyes to the needs and challenges and frustrations that we all sort of run into around end of life. And that even working for a large church, there were areas of growth and things that would be helpful to learn. Um, and then just kind of at the heart of it, we as people, as modern people in America, have kind of moved away from talking about death and dying. It's sort of hidden in our culture,
Yep.
right? It's sort of it's put into institutions. People die in hospitals, away from the home, away from sight.
Yeah.
Um, and so because we've sort of moved away from it, we we have a hard time talking about it. We have a hard time acknowledging it as a reality of our existence. We have a hard time knowing how to show up for people in it,
Mm.
knowing how to make space, how to normalize this conversation. So anyway, that was a long answer to but I do think at the heart of it, it is about community and it is about things we don't necessarily want to do or like to do, right? But
Yeah.
they're important. So,
Yeah, it strikes me that, so if somebody's just joining and this is like the first time they've heard uh they've heard this podcast, the past couple episodes have been me kind of processing
mhm,
my dad's recent and unexpected passing.
mhm,
And it strikes me in the wake of that how important um particular friendships have been.
mm,
And I'm an only
wow,
child,
yeah,
so I don't have
mhm,
like the sibling dynamic where if a parent passes, there's the potential for like really really good support or
mhm,
significant challenges just among the kids.
mhm,
It's just me and my mom, and
mm,
thankfully, our relationship is like super good, and
mhm,
we're able to talk a lot. It's a lot of talking, but we're able to
mhm,
do it. Um, and that feels really really good. And then there have been people that you kind of don't know what to expect from folks until they offer or you ask,
yeah,
and,
yeah,
and then you see how people show up, and it's it's across the spectrum, right? It's
yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
they're the folks who are giving advice right away and say like,
Mhm,
have you done this, this is really important, and it's like they've gone through the process and they know the pain, but it's from the inside they have that like, this is really important and I didn't know about it, so I want to make sure that you know about it.
mhm, yeah, yeah,
And then there are others who are willing and able, and I kind of count this as a particular skill or gifting. They're just able to sit with you,
mhm, yeah,
and there
mhm,
isn't a need to fill the space with words or with a particular action. It's just presence.
mhm, yep,
um, and all of that has been uh, a dynamic part of this journey for me. I
mm,
guess one
mm,
question that comes to mind is, what was it like, or what is it like, and what has it been like for you to enter into that
mhm,
with um without kind of like the history of friendship or the history of a familial bond with the people that are coming to you?
yeah. It's so interesting because, as somebody who's worked in events, I've done a lot of different events, right? I've done weddings, bar mitzvahs, conferences, concerts, you name it. I've worked in some capacity probably with that type of event. But my favorite, actually, even when I was at Redeemer, were the memorial services, because there was an interesting bond that formed in the process of working with these individuals. And I felt closer to them and they felt closer to me, I think, than other events, other event organizers. And there's just something that happens when you enter this space of being vulnerable and just trying to figure out how to navigate this. And I know I was just a small part in everything else that was happening in their lives. But to be there and what you were saying, like those friends who just are present, to be present, to be there, to want to help them honor their loved one as much as I could do, as much as possible. Just I think there's something there that happens. And I just always loved those events because I felt like it wasn't, a lot of other events, right? You're like, there's a purpose, there's an objective, like you're trying to make money if it's a nonprofit fundraiser, right? There's some kind of audience, there's some kind of marketing, and even weddings, there's a little bit of like competition in the wedding world of wanting to have
Interesting.
like a really great wedding. And what, right? There's always like, it's got to be creative, it's got to be personal. But there's something about these memorial services that I worked with where, I mean, at the heart of there's just something very human about we are here to mourn someone we've lost and we love, and we have all this grief and love and feelings, and we are coming together and we're not quite sure what to do with all of it, and it's just it's a different type of event, right? So even if we don't start out with those bonds of friendship, and even if I don't see, like, I've run into some of the individuals I've worked with, through the years, and it's always like there's a familiarity there
Hmm.
that is just sort of now sort of embedded in that relationship.
Yeah,
Even if I like don't see them that often, we don't call each other up, we don't, but something is there. So it's really interesting. It's really interesting.
that's beautiful. There's something that you mentioned um that struck me, and kind of like the intention or the purpose behind the
Mhm,
event, in terms of like the event is about this other person, right? The
mhm.
person that we've lost. The
Yeah,
it's not even about the separation that we're suffering. It kind of facilitates maybe the expression of that, but the event
mhm,
itself is about the person. And
mm,
there's this kind of context of not knowing, right? This is
yeah,
especially if the loss is very, very close. It's like, okay, life is different now, and I
yeah,
can't operate in the same assumptions necessarily as before.
yeah.
I wonder, I've in in my own experience now, my mom has been saying this, uh whenever we talk, I kind of brag on her because I'm bearing
Mhm,
witness to her process, right? Which is
mhm,
my mom, my mom and dad would have been married 50 years in a couple months.
mhm.
So
Wow. Yeah,
long time. It's a
yeah.
And they've had a life in which uh their connection was, at least from my perspective, like a model for what it meant for two people to become one.
Mm,
And
mm,
so I can't even imagine what happens when it's like the one that was there, half of that
yeah,
one goes away.
yeah.
And the shift of life that somebody goes through in the aftermath of that. And I, so we talk and kind of go through all the conversations, all the topics that might come up. And my mom would say something like, she was on the phone with a friend and they said, "You're doing great." And she's like, "I don't feel like I'm doing great."
Mhm,
And I would tell her, "You're doing amazing,
mhm,
especially for kind of all the other options that could exist in the wake of such a severe loss." And my mom's answer is, "Yeah, but everything we're doing for dad."
mm,
There's this
mm.
almost complete uh focus on the love of another person, or the love for another person.
Yeah,
And so the navigation through the unknown
yeah.
has a it feels like it has a very different quality about it.
Mhm,
And for me, it's all, the language is all like hand of God, grace upon grace. Like it's all of
right.
it's all of that, and you have a front row seat to it, um, which feels very touching. you know,
Yeah. And it's all new terrain, right? And none of us know how we would navigate it and what it feels like until we get there.
yeah,
And even when we get there, it can change day to day. And so there's also that sort of, it's such a recalibration of everything, right? It's like the world as we know it is different. We don't know how we're going to navigate it until we get there.
mhm,
There's really no way to prepare for how it's going to be, right? It's like going on a long journey, but you're not quite sure what to bring and if you're going to use it and if your path is going to change and what the weather's going to be like. And,
yeah,
it's really, and so I think that's why I loved what you said earlier about like, I think one of the best things we can do is accompaniment, right? Like because everyone's situation is different. And even within the situation, things will change
mhm,
day by day, hour by hour,
yep,
right? And so, what does it look like for us to accompany one another on this journey where neither of us really have a roadmap, but we just know we're going to do this together,
yeah,
And I think that's where the beauty and the power of community and friendships and knowing people who can just accompany with you in that,
yeah,
whatever that looks like.
yeah, yeah. It's striking.
Mhm.
The just I think just the ability. Well, it's kind of like sacred ground, right? If
Yep. Yep.
if you're invited into that space with another person, it's kind of like somebody saying, I want you to see
Yeah.
as as I go through this. And
Yeah.
if you see me slipping, like,
Mhm.
you know, uh if you see me holding on too tight, or if you see me
Mhm. Mhm.
forgetting, you know, forgetting something that I know I believe. Um, if you see me start to get angry, like,
Mhm.
you're the person that I entrust to be there for me in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe it's not a correction I need. Maybe it's just like a soft landing in that moment.
Yep. Yep.
But I trust you as a person to be there as I go through this.
Mhm.
And that's, yeah, that's a really intimate place.
Mhm. It is. It is. And it's it takes to be people who can do that, it takes cultivation. It's hard. It's not natural, I think, especially in the way we live now, where everything is efficient and fast and we're busy and we want to fix things a lot. There's always a fix, there's always a solution, there's always a hack or an app or something, right? And so I think to be people who can do that is it actually takes practice and it's hard and it takes a lot of grace with ourselves and with one another. um but I think it's like it requires us to slow down, to make space, to be okay with silence and not having answers and awkwardness and discomfort, and they're all things that we naturally like push against. So
Mm,
it's also like, how do we become people who can do this, right, for one another? And we all can do it. It's not a question of whether or not we can do it, but it is like cultivating that, right? And becoming people who I often think about how comfortable am I with discomfort?
yeah.
Like, how do I become more comfortable with discomfort instead of always trying to make the discomfort go away,
Yep.
you know? Um, because like you can't always make the discomfort go away. And sometimes it's good that the discomfort is there because I think like death is a disruption.
Yep.
It is an interruption to how we kind of inherently know that life should be,
Mm.
you know, how the world should be, and the death is like the greatest disruptor of that. So I don't think it should feel fine. I don't think we should embrace it or be like, well, that's how it is, you know. And it's the fact that it's deeply deeply sad and deeply disruptive is actually the way that's how we should feel toward death, you
Yeah, it's
know. And so I think to try to make
reality.
it feel better
Yeah.
is is kind of, I don't know, I don't know if it's effective. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, so part of my story is that because of my connection to very, very old people at a very, very young age in the tap dance world, I
Mm-hmm.
started going to funerals at a very young age.
Mm,
I started attending, I think my first one was when I was 11 or 12. And
mm,
because of the number of old people that I knew and I was close with,
mm-hmm.
the funerals didn't really stop. They were just kind of a continual part of my life.
Right. Yeah.
And there is a so in the tap dance community, when you go to the funeral of a tap dancer, there's dancing. Like
Mm,
everybody has their shoes, and there's always a moment where that's invited,
mm,
and
mm. Wow.
it's in the funeral service. So different than maybe like the traditions in New Orleans, where as you go to the cemetery, the band is playing like a very sad piece of music, and then as you leave the cemetery, it's more kind of the celebration of life, right?
Mhm.
um we dance we dance in the church, like wherever
Mm,
wherever the thing is happening, that's where the dancing happens.
mm,
And so there's often been a connection for me between, well, there's been a regularity of the interruption, right? That this is
mm-hmm.
kind of a process that happens in life, and
Mm-hmm.
there's been a connection between like an okayness of holding the deep sadness that we
Mm-hmm.
feel because of the loss and the experience of that person in the physical reality will not ever happen again for
Yeah.
me. And there's this space to fill, and
Mm-hmm.
we kind of get to decide what to fill it with.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately in the tap dance community, it's like, no, we fill it with dancing. Like let's just go do that.
Yeah.
um, and interestingly, for me with my dad, a lot of it has been kind of me feeling for probably the first time in my life, really, that I can exercise being the kind of man
Mm-hmm.
that I saw in my dad,
Mm, mm-hmm.
because the space that he used to fill with his presence is not filled anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And so, you know, big questions like, what does it mean for me to care for my mom now
Yeah.
in light
Yeah.
of her not having my dad, and knowing
Mm-hmm.
that I can't be my dad for her, but that
Right.
I
Right.
can love her in a way that's different than the son that's off, like trying to figure out how to be a professional tap dancer and coming home and like recounting stories and whatnot. um
Mm,
that's that's not the priority anymore. Like that's not the rhythm of life.
yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
it's been a really interesting a really interesting shift.
Mhm. It's such a, you know, when you were talking about that, reminded me, I think C.S. Lewis, I'm like paraphrasing this through Tim Keller about something that C.S. Lewis said. So I'm not
Good.
sure, you know, someone should look this up later. But but I think it was you know, this notion that when that people bring out different sides of us, right? And when they're gone, we don't get to see that side of of ourselves or other people anymore, because it was something that that particular individual brought out in people, right? So as you were saying that, I was thinking how the opposite is also true, in the sense that when somebody is gone, not only do we not see the part of us that they bring out, but we're also changing to perhaps fill some of the space of them not being there anymore. And so there's also parts of us that would not necessarily be there, you know, if they were still here, which I had never thought about until you were talking about your dad. And that's really interesting that you have sort of noticed that and are like acknowledging that. Like, that's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, there's
Do
a
you feel like you're, oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna ask kind of a follow-up. Like, do you feel like you're consciously kind of making decisions and choices with this, like trying to figure out what that looks like to be in that space? Or do you feel like it's sort of just happening and you're noticing it?
I think the latter. There that's a really interesting question. I think there's kind of like a formation question in there,
Mm, mm,
which
yeah.
is how much of what I'm doing is conscious, where I
Hmm.
feel like I have to think about the choices,
Hmm.
and how much of it is uh, something something that's more characteristic that now has space to be expressed.
Hmm. Hmm.
Where in light of my dad's presence uh, in my life, there wasn't a need for me to express it.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I've often caught myself saying in the past 2 weeks, my dad didn't know how not to be a husband or father.
Mm,
And
mm, yeah.
that's both a wonderful thing and also uh, can be like a very imposing thing, right? Because he
Yeah.
was he was always there in that capacity to protect, to educate, to uh, provide.
Yeah.
And so, and he always saw in me that I would be able to do all those things.
Hmm.
But I was never sure because of the practice question,
Right.
right? Because I have a dad that
Right.
does that like has that down, right?
Right. Right.
So I don't really have to do that if I'm hanging out with him. And it's like,
Right. He's got
got
it.
it. So it's covered for a multitude of people. Right?
Right. Right. Right.
And then when I go out into the world didn't like, at least the world in the way that I experienced it didn't have a slot for that character,
Hmm.
right? It's not
Hmm.
like, yes, we need providers and protectors and folks who can be sensitive and show up and know how
Hmm.
to love in a very deep and connected way. Like,
Hmm.
you guys, you go over here. Like, this is your role,
Right.
and you just,
Right.
we work you out, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
It was more like, we don't know what to do with you. Like,
Mm.
you're a guy that cries. You're a sensitive type. You like, we're gonna put you in the corner over
Put you
there.
in that corner,
Yeah.
right?
Like, and all the guys who don't cry or who are like physically physically strong, like they get the lane.
Mm.
These are all stereotypes, but
Sure, sure.
it's been really interesting for me, and this all happened very, very recently. Um, for me to land in a place where I actually like seem to understand more clearly what my dad was trying to do,
Yeah.
as in being the person that he was and in relating to my mom and me in the way that he was.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
It was kind of like he was trying to do a thing, and it
mm-hmm,
was it was
mm-hmm,
very conscious for him in light of uh where he was coming from.
mm-hmm.
Like he came from
Yeah.
a family of origin and a world that was uh not a model for the kind of love that he wanted to share and be a part of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when he found my mom and then they had me, like his idea of the family
Yeah.
was literally the, and he told me this once, like this is your, as the man of a house,
Mm-hmm.
you have the opportunity to create a slice of heaven on earth.
Mm.
You get to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so like in the week leading up to his passing, and then in the 2 weeks since, it's kind of been, part of it has been me reflecting on that and
Mm.
experiencing what he left in me
Yeah. Yeah.
coming out in a
Mm-hmm.
in a way, in a kind of clarity that I wasn't able to express at home because I yielded to my dad. Like he was the guy.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's been really interesting. So it's less of a, this is what my dad would want, so I'm going to do this now.
Right. Right. Right.
It's more
Yeah.
like, this is what I know to be good and right on account of how my
Right.
dad was with me,
Yep.
and that's what's coming out now.
Mm-hmm. That's really beautiful. It's it sounds like he has really left a beautiful legacy of being a good father and a good husband, and it sounds like generally a good man, to you, but not so that you would be a carbon copy, because you can't be, right? You're your own person, he's his own person, but it's like he's left this really beautiful gift of a legacy, and it's kind of up to you what you want to do with that gift of legacy and how that is expressed or shared or even embedded in you. So it's a really beautiful gift that is for you, and for you to sort of be free to enjoy and to share and to know and to sort of unwrap that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so
Yeah.
that kind of puts me back to the question that came up in our conversation around practice.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If this is what my, like, in my world, if this is what my dad did and this is what I've been left with,
Yeah.
and this seems to be like on the spectrum, on the really good side of things,
Mm-hmm.
is there a way to share, or is there a way to show up that helps others know that this is possible
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in their own lives? um
Yeah.
and it drills a little further down for me on account of how what we believe interacts with what we think is actually possible,
Yep.
right? And so in light of someone who would say, uh, the possibility for experiencing heaven now is available, how do we practice being with one another in
Yeah.
all the moments of life, such that in the really, really hard ones, we just keep
Yes.
doing the thing that we've been doing, and it just happens to be a harder thing.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's
Yeah.
one of the questions that I'm kind of carrying out of all of this.
What are you gleaning as you're carrying this? Like what is in this process of, trying to unpack that? Like, is there anything that you sort of gleaned so far that you would want to share?
Well, I think uh and this might be a personality thing, because there's all these ideas of like love languages and how we give and receive, and I personally think the ministry of presence, like being present in the small things,
Yeah.
has a significant impact on relationships. And but it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of attention.
Yes. Yes.
And those are two things that culturally we feel like, or there seems to be a sense of a lack of both,
Yes. Yep.
or a fighting for both. And so moments where you either create the opportunity or say no to something for the sake of saying yes to being with someone,
Right.
pro- provides a just a different dynamic in the way that you connect. And it reminds me of Bonhoeffer, where there was somewhere I remember reading that one of his thoughts around going back to Germany in the middle of World War II was that if he wasn't there with the people in the middle of the thing, he would have no standing in whatever the conversation would be after the thing.
Yep. Yeah.
And he never got to see the aftermath, right? I think he was executed just before the fall of the Third Reich. But that idea of
Yeah.
I have to I have to be with you before and during,
Yeah. Yeah.
for for me to have a connection with you in
Yep.
in the necessary rebuilding that kind of happens in moments of disruption.
Yeah.
Um, and I've always been desiring to be in that sacred place of like the reconstruction. Like I have really good ideas of how to get better, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's taken me a really long time as a person to realize that it doesn't matter how good the ideas are. I mean, they're important, but they're not as important as being a trusted person beforehand
Yes. Yep.
and being
Yep.
invited into the life of somebody else, like being able to share life, not just tasks or achievements. Um,
Or solutions, I think.
right.
Yeah. 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 It reminds me of one of the books I've really enjoyed is The Lost Art of Dying by Dr. Lydia Dugdale.
Hmm.
and she talks about the Ars Moriendi, which is a medieval manual to dying, basically, that became very popular during the bubonic plague because all these people were dying. A lot of people who normally, assisted with the dying, like clergy, were also dying. So there was
Huh.
just like this massive, death, right? And so this book was a way of helping people to cultivate practices that would help them to face the temptations and the feelings that would come up as they were facing death.
Yeah.
But something she says in the book is about community life
Hmm.
and how, to sort of envision like somebody who's dying is kind of like the main actor, the central character, like in a play, and we're all supporting characters and we're participating in this scene to support the main character, but it's also really we're all rehearsing for when we will be the main character someday,
Hmm.
which is a really powerful sort of metaphor, right? And then
Yeah.
she also says that community life does not just appear overnight around a deathbed. And I've
Right.
been thinking about that a lot because it's true. Like you were saying, people aren't just going to show up. We can't expect people to show up if we haven't spent time and really invested in relationships and built trust
Yep.
and like learned how to be there for one another in small things. Like I like to think that I would know how to respond in a crisis, but if I haven't been practicing simple things,
Yeah.
along the way, I'm probably like for a while during the height of sort of the anti-Asian sentiments here in New York, when these women were being killed and it was just like really scary kind of,
Yep.
my husband was very like concerned about me riding the subway and stuff. And I was like, yeah, I can take care of myself. And I'm like, no, I can't. Do I think I'm going to suddenly like become a martial arts like champion if someone were to attack me? Like, of course not. I've never practiced. I've never done that. Like, why would I think I would suddenly be able to like do that?
Yeah. It's like
So I
the
think in a similar vein, like I like to think I'm going to respond really well in moments of crises. But if I haven't been practicing, if I haven't been cultivating, like I can't expect to be like that?
the things that comes to mind is like the fallacy of the Matrix, right? Like
Yeah.
I need to fly a helicopter. All right, let's just get me that information so that I can go do that and forget about,
Right.
10,000 flying hours that I need.
Right? Yeah, it's just funny. Yeah, it's really funny. But I think there's something about the cultivation of things. And there's also something really interesting, I think, there's habits that we don't like doing and we don't want to do them,
Yeah.
right? But they're still good. There's a movie, the scene always stayed with me in an otherwise pretty mediocre or even terrible movie, called Paris Je t'aime, Paris I Love You by Woody Allen. It was years ago, over 20 years, I think. But it's a movie of all these different love stories and vignettes from around Paris. All pretty, I mean, as a whole, movie, not great. But the one vignette that really stood out to me that I've been coming back to a lot, even as, with my organization Here to Honor, as we've been developing workshops around end of life learning, and also thinking about what does it mean to cultivate, these habits and practices, and kind of in a way reviving the Ars Moriendi and how we prepare ourselves to face the different temptations and feelings that can come up around death.
Mhm.
There's one particular vignette. This man is about to leave his wife. He's gotten tired of her and their marriage. He has a young mistress. So they're meeting for lunch and he's going to leave his wife. But she comes in and she's crying because she just went to the doctor and she's been diagnosed with a terminal illness and she's
Wow.
going to die.
Yep.
So in that moment, he has this inner dialogue, inner monologue where he's like, it's a chance for him to stand, to like rise to the occasion. So
Yeah.
he rises to the occasion, calls it off with his mistress, and stays and loves his wife. And there's this beautiful line where basically by acting like a man in love, he became a man in love again. And when she died, he was just heartbroken because he really, really loved his wife again.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just such a beautiful, powerful, short vignette, but just this idea that, you know, and I think as a Christian, I've seen that. I have practiced liturgy and said prayers when I didn't want to,
Yep.
but it's like the going back to it and the habit and just doing it even when I don't want to, that transformation can happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's something there too, the things we don't want to do, the things that are uncomfortable, the things that we don't think we can do, and even the people that we want to be, it doesn't happen overnight. These things don't happen overnight. There is a commitment and a decision to engage with it and to practice. And by doing these practices, we actually become the people that perhaps we aspire to be, you know?
Yeah. That's beautiful. Um, gosh,
I
there's
mean, I would recommend the movie as a whole, but that vignette was very powerful.
yeah, it brings to mind a book by Ira Byock. And
Mm-hmm.
Ira
Yep.
Byock is kind of a well-known figure in the world of palliative care.
Mm-hmm.
And the book is called, if I get the title right, I think it's the Four Things.
Mm-hmm.
And the book is a series of stories of people that he was involved with at the end of their life,
Mm-hmm.
how a series of four statements, four things to say,
Yeah.
affected that time between the person that was in the process of leaving and the
Mm-hmm.
relationships that they were surrounded by. And the
Mm-hmm.
four things were simply uh, thank you, I'm sorry, uh, I forgive you, and I love you.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
I'm sorry is like forgive me. It kind of balances
Yeah.
the forgiveness side of things. But the I read that book years and years and years ago, because I was asked to read it and then interpret it for a tap dance story for a palliative care conference. So it was like
Mm.
it wasn't on account of
Wow.
the experience um, being personal, but I read that book and I wept through it. It was so moving.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
you know, the power of words and the simplicity of things that we do and
Mm-hmm.
the effect that they might have on who we become.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me and for most of the people that I'm around, we know that like who we are affects other people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can be agreed upon. Like who I am is going to affect
Yeah.
the people that I'm with. But there's also the like who I am affects who I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what are the things that I do that affect who I am
Mm-hmm.
and the person that I'm becoming?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I have agency in that. There are things that I
Mm-hmm.
can do.
Yeah.
I might not be able to like snap my fingers or literally control aspects of my character,
Mm-hmm.
but in some traditions of spiritual formation, there's this idea that if you want to become less angry, you can't go at your anger, right?
Mm.
If you try and do something there, you'll probably become more angry. Like it doesn't get better.
Uh-huh.
But there are things that you can do that indirectly affect the
Mm.
seed of anger that's in you that you're trying to pull out of the ground.
Right, right.
And in the end, in these ideas, like God is actually the one that can pull that seed out.
Right.
And so all the things that we do are kind of positioning or
Yes. Yeah.
like testing things out. Like,
Mhm.
am I still an angry person if I get cut off while I'm driving? Let's see today. Uh, if somebody cuts in line as you're entering the subway, is like, is there something that comes up, or
Yeah.
are we
Right. Right.
are we more prone to bless that person?
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah. And
and
usually what happens in the moment isn't what we're actually, it's not the thing, it's not actually that thing. If somebody cuts me off, I'm not angry because they cut me off. That is triggering something else in me that's causing the anger usually, right? Is it because
can
I'm
be.
like, how dare they cut in front of me? Is it they're going against the rules of society? Is it
Yeah.
because I'm already late and they're making me later? Like there's always something else, which is why like what you're saying, like the seed of the anger, right? It's also usually not that immediate thing. It's connected to something else that's bigger.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
the deeper thing is the thing that we can't access ourselves,
exactly. Yeah.
right? We we rely um we rely on God to do that work. And
Mhm, mhm.
I think that the thing that I've been trying to work out in my own life and see it happen is like, well, what are the things that position me for God to do what only he can do?
Yeah, that's good.
And there's if you talk to me like 5 6 months ago, I would not have wanted to be in a position
Mhm.
where I was the sole caretaker of my mom.
Yeah,
Right? It's like that's not what I would have wanted to be.
yeah.
Um, I was kind of filled with plenty other priorities,
Mhm.
and in staying with the tension of trying to figure out what my relationship with my folks should be like,
Mhm, mhm.
I've landed in a place where I feel honored to be my mom's, like in the position of like her second person,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Like to fulfill the duties of being a son. Um, I it's super tiring and I'm super emotional,
yeah,
but I
yeah,
also feel really good about it.
yeah,
And that's not something that I could do by effort or by
yeah.
force.
Yeah, yeah. I love how you use that phrase and concept of positioning yourself and positioning ourselves. And it's true. There's this deep work that's actually really spiritual and supernatural, right? That we can't do ourselves, but what we can do is position ourselves and, do the practices, like not be afraid to put ourselves into, in these opportunities and situations where that work can get done, right? But it's like, but we have to, like, I can't expect to be like super fit if I don't position myself in the gym, right? Like things like that. Like I have to put myself somewhere
Yeah.
where the work can be done.
Yeah.
So I feel like I love how you phrase that because it's true. It kind of takes the weight of it in a way. It takes the weight of that responsibility, that ultimate responsibility off us. But it does also, um, there is still a call, something we have to answer,
Hmm?
right? We have to do something. We have to do it. We have to actually show up.
Yeah.
But the weight of the transformation is not on us.
Yep.
which is very liberating. But it
Ye-
also doesn't let us get away with it. Right.
Right.
So like
Yeah,
both true.
there's the balance of what I kind of find is like we can do something. It's not that we can't
Mhm.
do anything about it. We have
Yep.
an
Yep.
opportunity to actually act in a way that might
Yep.
be beneficial for us in a very deep and real sense.
Yeah.
And we're not in charge,
Exactly. Yep.
right? It's like it's super humbling to, especially as an action oriented person and someone who's like, well, I go into the studio and I practice my dancing and my dancing gets better. It's like it's very direct.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like I can't do that with my character and with my
Yeah.
will. If I
Yeah.
if I do that, I become like a shell of a person
Hmm.
because I think that I think that I'm in charge. And I start to think
Yeah.
of other people like, well, shoot, man, if I'm in charge, why aren't you doing what I think is right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
ultimately, like there's a wonderful sacredness to, it seems at least, to the idea that we can, to whatever degree we are able, we can
Yeah.
choose a particular direction.
Yeah. Yep.
And knowing that we can't change ourselves, like that is
Hmm.
something God can do, then it's
Hmm.
like, okay, well, in the scope of choices that I have, what
Hmm.
are the good ones?
Yeah.
And in the long run, like what are the ones that will help me and God work together for the things that
Yeah.
He's shown me I need to work on,
Hmm.
so that
Yeah.
in the hard moments, for whatever community I'm a part of, I can show up in a way that I don't have to think about it and it's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It becomes intuitive in a way, right? I mean, after all the years of tap dancing you've done, things that you had to really think about, I'm sure, when you first started, you don't have
oh
to
yeah,
think about it anymore. It's become like instinctive,
yeah,
intuitive, right?
yeah. The
Yeah.
language shifts,
Yep.
right? Instead of tracking every task, you're like, well, it's kind of like walking for for people in general. Like
Right.
we don't think about all the things that happen. We say,
Right.
I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna walk to the right. And like I'm
Right. Right. Right.
aware of all of that, and
So true.
if you see someone who is unable to do that thing,
Hmm.
then we might have a vision for how complex and how much grace is involved in taking
Yeah.
all of that for granted.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's the potential for an interesting kind of mirror between that idea and the things of the inner world,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
we can often take for granted all the good things that we already have formed in us.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a cool place to land.
Hmm. Hmm.
And on the flip side, we can hide from all the things that we have the opportunity to continually be involved in forming,
Hmm. Hmm.
because
Hmm.
sometimes they're hard to look at.
Yeah, that's
Um,
true.
in the same way that a loss is sometimes really, really hard to look at.
Yeah. Yeah.
But something changes in the context of love,
Yeah.
right? There's the opportunity for connection that you experience with the people that come
Mhm.
to you.
Mhm.
There's an opportunity to see the loss as a reality and
Mhm.
walk through it as a reality and
Mhm.
feel both the the sense of deep loss and
Mhm.
the the remnant of love that you
Yeah,
get to carry forward.
yeah,
um
it's
and it might be the
true.
opposite. It's like this loss brings up a ton of pain, and you're like, okay, well, that's something that you get to work out, and the way that you
Mhm.
work that out is also a witness to the love that you have.
Yep, yep, that's true. It's another facet of love that we don't experience,
Yeah.
right? Until we kind of go through this loss, and then it's like this other side.
Yeah.
It's like going to the other side of the moon, going to the dark side of the moon or something,
Yeah.
and you see this other facet that we wouldn't have seen. Can I ask, you shared I think you shared things that have touched on this, but I'm curious, as you feel comfortable sharing, if there's anything that's been surprising in this journey in the last few weeks, or anything that's anything that's been surprising in any way,
Yeah. That's a good
since your
question.
dad passed.
um so I was hmm there are well it's like there are many things that might be surprising, and then for me it's like they all bear witness to God's love in my life. And for
Mm,
me, like as a particular individual that God knows. So
mm,
um there were a series of things that in the week prior to my dad's passing and even the day before
mhm,
prepared me for my dad's passing.
mm,
Something as simple as uh, my dad and I have had this dynamic where if I get really, really clear about something about my life, like my career or a particular choice around relationships, like friendships or something,
mhm,
um, I get really excited and really focused. And in
mhm.
that moment, over the course of my life, my dad has asked me for something that takes my focus off of this thing that I get like so focused on. And I
Right,
used to
right.
get so frustrated with that, just with that
Uh-huh,
dynamic. Love my
uh-huh.
dad, want to help, but really now, like I just lost interest. What? And Monday, the day before my dad passed, I was having a call with a friend of mine and and sharing with them that I felt really, really sure about this new direction that I'm trying to take in
Uh-huh,
kind of the portfolio of work that I juggle and the way
uh-huh.
that I'm thinking about my life. And I got off that call and I had this thought. I said, "Watch out, Dad's gonna ask for something." and, and I'm like, okay, well, knowing the dynamic that I've had around that ask and knowing
Right.
that frustration is something that I don't want, I was like, cool,
Uh-huh.
thanks for the preparation. I'm gonna try to not be frustrated with the request, whatever the request is. Like, I trust that I have
Mm,
enough time and that there isn't
uh-huh.
pressure around the focus and that I can do both things. Like, I can care for my dad and this thing will not be taken away from me.
Right, right.
That was Monday.
Mm,
My dad passes Tuesday night.
Mm.
And
Wow.
so there's a part of me that's like, well, I didn't expect you to like ask me for all this.
Right.
It's, and it's just so those, that kind of thing was like, okay, something might happen, and
Yeah.
that's all I had. And then I've been I was in the habit of reading the book of John. Um, and Monday night was I was reading chapter by chapter, which is this is a chunk. But
Hmm.
Monday night I read the chapter where Jesus is on the cross and he's telling his mom, "Mother, look at your son," pointing at John, and "Son, look at your mother."
Hmm. Hmm.
And I saw like those two lines for the first time as a reconstitution of the family.
Mm.
Not just,
Wow. Yeah.
I know my mom is going to need to be taken care of, and so I'm going to give her to John. But
Yeah.
there was a separation, like a deep separation of a familial bond that happened for Mary when Jesus was on the
Yeah.
cross. And
Yeah.
in his moment, he made
Yeah.
sure that she had a family.
Yeah.
And coming from that region, coming from the Middle East, like the family can almost become an idol, right? It is
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
important and that significant, and
Yeah.
those relationships are so um connected, so deeply intertwined,
Hmm.
that to see Christ's tenderness towards his mom
Hmm.
in that
Hmm.
moment,
Yeah.
it shifted my perspective to my own mom.
Mm.
um the day before my dad passed.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so like so there, and there were a lot of small things like that that happened literally just the week prior,
Mm.
that to me are witnesses to God knowing each of us. Like he knew exactly what I needed to be able to be the kind of person that when this happened, not a question,
Mm.
right? You
Yeah.
show up, you do whatever's needed, and you get the energy that you need. Like it's all fine.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, in the same way that he allowed my mom and dad to never talk about what death would be like for either of them.
Mm.
And so in my dad's passing, I get to see my mom kind of go through this. We never talked about this. I
Mm.
I am completely unprepared in that way,
Mm.
and completely reliant on what my life with God has been and what my life with my husband has been.
Hmm.
And that is like overflowing with love. So I get to see
Mm.
that work out.
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so there's like all of that kind of in the mix, and it's surprising, but it's also very much like, wow, we get this.
Mm. Hmm.
That's really cool.
Mm.
And you
Yeah.
kind of talk about it from a position of favor,
Yeah.
but I actually believe that like not the same experience, but the same quality of experience is
Hmm.
available for everybody.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
And so, in the wake of what I'm doing, and the reason that I was excited to have a conversation with you is like, okay, how do we share the possibility?
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
I know from knowing you that the people that come to you are going to have an experience of that time in their life that is
Mhm.
qualitatively different than if they came to somebody else,
Mhm.
right? And so it's like, okay, well, we need more people. Like we need, we need more Evas in positions for people like
Oh,
that. And how do we share that? Like how do we that it's possible? It's not
yeah.
gonna be the same, right? It's
Yeah.
not cloning Eva around the world. It's just the expression of God in your life and the love that you've received comes out in your work,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And that affects the quality of interaction that people have with you.
Yeah. That's very kind of you to say, first of all. I think we need more Andrews in the world who are super talented and think deeply and love deeply.
I
Um,
wasn't fishing
but
for compliments.
but I do think, I loved what you shared, and thank you for answering my question and sharing that. And it was really beautiful. And it makes me think that, you know, we conceptually understand grace, right? We conceptually know grace. But what you shared was how these graces specifically were expressed and showed up for you. And how they showed up for you would be different for how they show up for me, right?
Yeah,
These particular specific grace.
yeah,
But the concept of grace is still universal, and it's something that we can all sort of connect to. And I wonder if a part of that is also true for us as in how we bring forth things and express things, right? Like we all are gifted very differently. We all have very different personalities, very different temperaments. And yet, the way that grace can be expressed through what we have is also going to be different and needed in
yeah,
the way that it's different.
yeah.
So it's kind of like, I think, I loved I just keep coming back to this positioning yourself in practices,
Mhm.
because we all have the stuff inside us that is built for love and care and connection, how we choose to cultivate them, and how we choose to position ourselves to make them available for others, even as they're available for us. Like those are our choices,
Yeah,
to just, that's within our agency, like every single person, right? But how they're going to come out and what they look like is going to be really different, and it's good that they're different. That is part of the grace of all of us being very different in how that's being expressed.
yeah,
So, but how
yeah,
to do that? That's why we're in this together, and you know, figuring it out and kind of fumbling on this journey. And I think that's the beauty of being in community, because I don't necessarily see it in myself, but other people see it,
yeah,
right? And I can see things in other people that they can't see. So we need that. We need the only way I think they really get cultivated is
yeah.
in relationship.
I think that's a perfect place to pause this conversation.
I know we could talk for hours. We
Yeah,
could
we
talk for
totally
hours.
can.
Really not a problem.
We totally could. Um, yeah, because we kind of just stayed on one topic for a long
I
time.
know.
There are
I
many,
know.
many others that we could explore. Well,
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you. If anyone who listens to this wants to find out more about what it is that you're doing, um,
Mhm.
where do they go?
Yeah, we have a website, here to honor, HERETOHONOR, here to honor.com. And it has information about the kind of workshops and trainings and resources that we provide. And you can contact me through that website as well.
Cool.
So
Well,
thanks,
thank
Andrew.
you.
It's always such a joy and delight to talk to you. And I just really love you, Andrew. So
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much for taking the time. And I look forward to whenever we get to chat again.
Me too. Take care.
Take care.
Okay. Bye.